Hey guys, how all of you beautiful people are doing? And yes, this is a new series, Accidental Gamer Hero. I accidentally saved the world and was granted 3 wishes when I died. Easy. First wish to reincarnate in the Naruto universe, and second is to reincarnate with the gamer ability. Third wish, I'll save it for later. /OC. So let's start without any delay. A cloud of chakra-infused gunpowder and ash spewed out of his mouth, surrounding Kenta before Asuma flicked his lit cigarette into the cloud and igniting the smoke screen. Boom! The cloud of gunpowder and ash ignited by the lit cigarette resulted in a violent explosion. The shockwave caused by the explosion reverberated into the surroundings, which Asuma used to maneuver himself in midair before falling and landing on his feet. On the other side of the battlefield, moments before the explosion, Miki had turned her head rapidly in the direction of her partner/lover when she heard his warning cry. Her previous state of arousal was erased in an instant and she pulled out the combat knife she had strapped to her thigh. Kenta and Miki were no strangers to battles, especially as missing nin. They were used to always being aware of their surroundings, the knowledge that a hunter nin from their village or other bounty hunters might appear and take their lives hung over their head constantly. But Kenta was smart. He devised a system where they could kill and raid to their heart's content but at the same time remain under the radar of the really dangerous people. That was their modus operandi, keeping a low profile to avoid catching the attention of major hidden villages. They had once been official Chunin ranked shinobi of Tanigakyo, already lovers when they had yet to abandon their village. Their defection was the result of a desire to escape the stifling system of control and meaningless lives they led while serving the village. Ever since then, they lived a life with no restrictions, no one telling them what to do or what not to do, and no pesky bureaucratic nonsense like incident reports when they killed innocent civilians on missions, the truest sense of what it meant to be free. But this freedom came with its consequences. Kenta and Miki were labeled as missing nin, wanted criminals for illegally abandoning their duties and village. Their bounties were low though, since the duo made sure not to injure or kill anybody when they were leaving the village. Their only official crime was defection, as they had been careful not to get seen when committing other crimes. That, however, did not lower their guards. They might have been flirting with one another just a minute ago, but even then their senses were on high alert. How things ended up like this baffled Miki, who knew that what she needed to do now was regroup with her lover and make sense of the situation. As Miki fished out her knife and readied herself to go to Kenta's aid, a thick cloud of what appeared to be ash poured out of the intruder of their romance. And the very next moment, an explosion erupted and engulfed her lover. "Kenta!" Miki screamed out in horror. But before she could run off to check on him, a sharp pain emanating from her chest stopped her. Looking down, Miki saw a bloody dagger protruding out of her left breast. Blood gurgled out of her mouth as it seeped out of the corner of her lips. She turned behind her, teary eyes widened in despair and utter shock. Behind her was a boy, who looked like he couldn't be older than 14, black hair tied up in a loose bun and a steely gaze staring straight into her eyes. More importantly, was the grip he had on the dagger thrusted into her back that extended out of her chest. "Kaiken, ta." Her last words were cut short as the boy ruthlessly twisted the dagger in his hands, sending waves of sharp, indescribable pain through her torso. But the shock of all that had occurred in the past 5 seconds dulled her sense of pain, and she could only look on in helplessness as her heart that had been pierced stopped beating. Seeing the slightest signs of life still remaining in his target, Shinji tore out the dagger violently and quickly stabbed her twice more in the back to finish the job. Finally, what little strength she had left was quickly drained, and she no longer had the vigor necessary to even remain standing. Shinji let her body fall forward, already half a corpse at that point. He turned to the remnants of the explosion grinning, ignoring the EXP system notification that appeared. Sneak attack success. 5 minutes before. A day after we burned down the cornfield, we were headed back to Konoha for some much-needed rest and recuperation. We were traveling on a path that was not as well traveled since we were hoping to avoid being recognized by any travelers. It was a relatively uneventful journey until Shino suddenly spoke up. "Sensei, the Kikaichu sent ahead of us to scout report that they detect blood in the distance." We stopped and Asuma frowned. "Hinata." The order was clear. Hinata nodded and activated her Byakugan to see what was going on in front. After months and years of intensive training, the range of her Byakugan had extended to an impressive 400 meters. Before she spoke, however, her face paled visibly. "Sensei, there are 2 shinobi, around Chuunin level I think, based on their chakra reserves. They are surrounded by a few dead bodies." The atmosphere turned grim. I put a hand on her shoulder, prompting her to continue as well as hoping to act as a source of comfort for the slightly distraught girl. It seemed like it worked as she took a deep breath and carried on her report. "One of them, a man, is counting money and the other, a woman, is collecting kunai and shuriken from the dead bodies. I think they are missing nin." She knelt down and drew out a kanji for valley on the dirt, before crossing it out with a horizontal line. "They have a forehead protector with this symbol on their person." Asuma's eyes sharpened, recognizing the rough drawing. "That is Tanigakyo's symbol, so what we have on our hands is 2 Chuunin missing nin who have presumably just murdered and robbed civilian travelers." He turned to us, his eyes shifting between the individual members of our team as though appraising us and our chances against the missing nin. "What do we do, Asuma-sensei?" I queried. Personally, I was rather happy about this unexpected but fortuitous encounter. After the depressing conclusion of our mission, I looked forward to doing some good for the world. What better way to give back to society, particularly the people of the Land of Rivers, than taking out 2 of their criminal missing nin who are apparently raiding innocent caravans. Hinata and Shino by my side raised their heads, staring at our squad leader, their eyes and demeanor urging him to make the right call. Asuma sighed reluctantly. "We take them out." I smiled, excited to finally see some action on our admittedly boring mission. I turned to Hinata, worried that she might be nervous, but caught her watching me as well. I smiled warmly at her, heartened to see her not the apprehensive mess I had expected her to be. Her face reddened but she placed her hand on my arm for reassurance regardless. Seeing that the situation was serious, Asuma took charge of the operation in lieu of his usual method of letting us figure things out ourselves. "Which one do you think is stronger, Hinata?" he asked. Just based on the strength of his chakra, the guy looks to be stronger." Asuma nodded in confirmation and started outlining his plan of attack while we stealthily approached our targets. "I will launch a sneak attack on the man. If the initial surprise factor doesn't take him down, I will use a ninjutsu to force them apart. It will be particularly destructive, so you 3 take that chance while they are distracted to launch a sneak attack of your own on the woman. You guys should be strong enough to take down an average Chuunin together, and that is considering Konoha's standards. These minor hidden villages are usually 1 step below the major hidden villages in terms of quality. But don't get complacent. You never know what to expect when fighting another shinobi. Hidden weapons, poison, or even self-destruct methods can be a possibility. he reminded us. Shinji, you will go first. Your reaction speed is fast enough to detect any hidden surprises, and you can also move fast enough to avoid it. If your first attack fails, Hinata and Shino, you two will move in to finish the job. Understood? Hi sensei. We answered. He humorously nodded, though I could see a trace of pride in his eyes watching us. Then let's move. Present. The dust from the explosion settled, and as Asuma expected, the ninjutsu was not able to finish the job. Ground zero of the explosion was charred black from the soot and intense heat, but where the missing nin had been standing now stood a small earthen pyramid that seemed to have taken the brunt of the impact. A Doton ninjutsu. Asuma analyzed. The earthen walls receded back into the ground as though it had never been there before, revealing the slightly scorched tiny missing nin grimacing. Kenta's eyes shifted left and right, searching for Miki before widening when he spotted her laying motionlessly on the ground, blood pooling under her body. Miki! He screamed in grief but did nothing else. The rage flooded his mind. He was experienced enough to know now was not the time to mindlessly seek vengeance. Right now he needed to escape. He needed to live. Revenge was a dish best served cold, after all. Kenta bit his bottom lip hard enough to draw blood, suppressing all the anguish and heartache through the pain. His figure trembled in his crazed desire for revenge, but he pushed it down, deep down within him. If Kenta had been an Uchiha, this would be the moment his Mangekyo Sharingan awakened. Konoha Shinobi. I promise you, one day, no matter how long it takes, I will hunt you down and kill every single one of you. This I swear upon Miki. No matter what, I will kill you. He screamed, promising brutal vengeance. Asuma raised an eyebrow amusedly. What are you talking about? The only way you're leaving here alive is tied up, you know. Now that there was only one of the missing nin remaining, Asuma relaxed considerably. He alone would be enough to take down this second-rate tiny shinobi. Kenta scowled, taking a step back in retreat before turning fully to escape. His path, however, was already closed off by Asuma, who had moved faster than Kenta could even react to block off his way. Don't resist. I have no qualms taking your life right now, but I kinda wanna show my cute students the proper procedures when capturing wanted criminals in the bingo book. So it's in your best interest to surrender. The Jounin advised. You bastard Konoha Shinobi, what did we ever do to you? Why? Why? Kenta roared, his grip tightening on his two short swords. Asuma's eyes narrowed, taking on a deadly glint. Are you seriously asking that, after what you just did? You're either delusional or plain mad. Come on now, last chance. We don't have to make this any more difficult. I will kill you. Kenta screamed, his desire for revenge now clouding his mind, seeing the likelihood of him leaving alive and uncaptured now dwindling before his very eyes. In front of him was, judging by the man's speed and strength, a Jounin from Konoha, and on the opposite end were 3 genin from Konoha. Just because they were genin did not mean Kenta would underestimate them. He knew from experience that genin from the 5 major villages were simply of a different level than those from minor villages like Tani. Just by sheer quality, there was a drastic distinction between shinobi of their caliber and the likes of his village. But if he had to choose between a Jounin or 3 genin, then the choice was obvious. I guess we have no choice but to do this the hard way then. Asuma sighed helplessly but with the absolute confidence afforded to a Jounin of his level. Kenta steeled his gaze and readied himself. However, before the missing nin could make his move, a young voice came from behind him. Asuma-sensei, please, let me take him. Shinji requested, sheathing the assassin's deadly dagger before pulling out the wakizashi that was strapped to his back. Asuma-sensei, please, let me take him. Shinji requested, sheathing the assassin's deadly dagger before pulling out the wakizashi that was strapped to his back. The genin wanted to test himself against what can be considered a Chuunin-level opponent, even if it was one from Tanigakyo. The previous Chuunin opponent he had faced was Mitsuki, a genuine elite Chuunin that was once considered for promotion to Takubetsu Jounin. But Shinji had only won due to a sneak attack that crippled the Chuunin's left arm, effectively sealing Mitsuki's use of jutsu. He wanted to fight an experienced shinobi to the death for real this time, no tricks, no sneak attacks, just mano-a-mano, one-on-one. Shinji was aware that ninjas did not often have honorable duels. They leaned more towards subterfuge, trickery and deception. But at a certain point, when all the tricks and schemes were rendered ineffective, all that was left was personal, individual strength. Furthermore, with his team and squad leader being there, his personal safety would be all but assured. So in terms of risk, while it wasn't zero, it was minimized to an acceptable degree. Not to mention he would only receive EXP if he was the one who dealt the killing blow. Asuma took his disciple's words into consideration. While he knew that Shinji did not lack experience fighting, with all the inter-team training sessions where the genin sparred with each other as well as the one-on-one spars Asuma had with him, Shinji was very much lacking when it came to life or death battles. The ability to remove panic, anxiety and nerves from the equation to make rational, logical decisions during the moment-to-moment problem-solving in a fight was invaluable. Though Shinji had always been an unnaturally calm kid who he had never seen unnerved even once, that didn't mean it would never happen. And when it inevitably will occur at least once in the future, Asuma wanted his treasured disciple to be able to pull himself back together when it did. The Jounin nodded, agreeing. All right. Show us what you can do, Shinji. Shinji smirked, settling into a basic kenjutsu stance based on what he had learned from Myriad Armament Fiend, while chakra flooded his body and sword. Kenta growled, "You bastards, you killed Miki, now you treat me as some kind of training dummy. Konoha Jounin, you will regret it once you see your student's blood drip down my blades. He will join Miki in the afterlife." The genin analyzed his opponent. Though his mental state seemed fraught, there were still no obvious openings in his stance. That showed Shinji that his opponent, while incensed, was not stupid. So first, a psychological attack to weaken his opponent's mind. "Miki, was that her name?" Shinji asked provocatively. "Fucker. Don't say her name with your filthy mouth." The missing nin shot back. "Ah, I see. You know, I was the one who killed her. Miki, that is. You." Shinji slowly approached his opponent, and though his mouth spat vile words, he never once let down his guard, cautiously waiting for the enraged Tani shinobi to lose his mind and make the first, careless move. "Do you want to know what her last words were?" Kenta widened his eyes. It was a trick, he knew it was. But, what if? She said. "Kenta." Shinji slowly drawled out, taking slow deliberate steps towards his opponent, who in turn waited with bated breath for what his next words would be. "Please," she begged, "Kenta, come join me in the afterlife. You bastard. You're dead." He screamed, half crazed with rage, as Kenta rushed forward, his swords racing towards Shinji. "Gotcha." Shinji leaned forward, letting chakra burst out the sole of his feet, wind-natured chakra. His experiments with using wind and fire nature chakra in conjunction with flash step produced varying results. With fire nature chakra, flash step caused an explosive effect that increased the speed at which he moved. But that in turn sacrificed his control over the distance at which he traveled, and the momentum was even harder to stop. As for wind nature chakra, well, it essentially boosted the speed and range of flash step, and at a reduced CP cost as well. Clang. Their blades clashed. Shinji's wakizashi met Kenta's twin scimitars. The missing nin had crossed his swords at the last minute to block the genin's attack when he realized he had messed up by moving first, driven by his emotions. The emotionally fueled attack he had planned was intercepted by Shinji's strike that left him in an awkward positioning. They separated slightly before Kenta swung wildly and rapidly at Shinji, who met his ferocious assault by either parrying the strikes he could or evading the ones he could not. The two exchanged blades for several moments, with neither backing down. The spectators of the fight gasped softly at the wild exchange, the wind blowing fiercely whenever their blades clashed. However, though Kenta's skill at wielding the twin swords were admirable, Shinji had his own advantages in the form of skills and perks. Bull strength. Shinji activated his perks ability, which increased his STR stat by 20%, the added strength giving him the power needed to forcefully suppress the missing nin. This kid, how is he this strong? Kenta thought to himself as he struggled to resist against his opponent, who had a much smaller frame. Shinji's leg snaked up and delivered a crushing kick on Kenta's midriff while the missing nin was busy trying to resist falling, pushing the man away and separating the two. Oi, how are you going to take revenge for Miki if you can't even equal me in power? How sad is she in hell, knowing the only one she could have counted on to protect her failed? That he is so weak he can't even stand his ground against a genin. Shinji jeered, continuing his mind games. Shut up. I told you not to say her name. Kenta snarled, rushing forward once more, however this time he did not move without thinking. Tani Kenjutsu, rumbling steps. Kenta sent Earth Nature Chakra into the ground with every step, causing minor seismic waves to shake the ground in the area. It was meant to cause havoc on the enemy's sense of balance, while the user, who remain unaffected by the minor earthquake, took the chance to dash forward and attack his enemy. Shinji was not unaffected by his opponent's technique, but he was not taken aback by surprise. He lowered his center of gravity by slightly squatting to reduce its effects. Channeling wind nature chakra into his wakizashi, which created a deadly layer of sharp, buzzing wind that significantly enhanced its lethality. He went low, swiping forward at Kenta's feet, which he judged to be the limbs causing the reverberations. The missing nin, in response, swung down at Shinji while leaping forward. However, Shinji had already predicted such a countermeasure. All he needed was for Kenta's feet to leave the ground to stop the seismic waves. As soon as he regained his balance, in a feat of inhuman dexterity and agility, Shinji spun himself to face Kenta and land a swift cut on his opponent. The sword, which had been layered with wind chakra, carved deep into Kenta's torso. Kenta took the slash, gritting his teeth from the pain, but was not deterred. He continued his downward slash that was about to cut down Shinji, who was in an awkward position. Just as his twin blades were about to make contact, Shinji disappeared from his sight explosively, causing dirt and dust to erupt thanks to the explosive nature of a fire chakra-fueled flash step. His blades carved into the ground instead, missing Shinji entirely, who had reappeared some distance away, his feet sliding on the ground in an attempt to catch himself as a result of the unmanageable, experimental technique. Kenta growled, planting his twin blades into the ground and formed several hand seals rapidly. Doton, cracked earth bullet. Slamming his palms on the ground, the earth in front of him broke apart and several large, sharp chunks flew out of the ground towards Shinji. The earthen projectiles were easily evaded by Shinji, who didn't even need to use his Sharingan to see the obvious trajectories, except one which was broken apart by a single fist from the boy through Shinkyoken, used in conjunction with Power Strike. Is that all you've got? Mickey is crying right now. Shinji taunted, as he returned with a ninjutsu of his own after forming the required hand seals, Kaiten, ash pile burning. Just like his sensei, Shinji spewed out a cloud of ash and gunpowder that rapidly advanced towards Kenta. Unlike Asuma, however, Shinji didn't have a cigarette to ignite the ash. Instead, he slid his wakizashi against the ground, and swung towards the desired direction. The sparks created from the friction of blade meeting earth, to the indignation of sword lovers all over, flew at the dark cloud. The moment the sparks made contact with the gunpowder, a massive eruption of flame and wind once more rocked the surrounding area. Shinji channeled wind nature chakra into his wakizashi again, this time pumping even more of it, lengthening the blade artificially using chakra as the layer of wind chakra covering it extended the blade to twice its original length. Not waiting for the dust to settle, Shinji braced himself and charged into the charred earth and heated air that was still hot from the explosion just moments before. A couple steps in, he spotted the same earthen pyramid Kenta had previously used to shield himself from the explosion, a technique that he was expecting. Though the rock walls were sturdy enough to withstand the explosion, his wind chakra-infused blade would cut through it like a hot knife through butter. Shinji dashed forward at his target and in a single, horizontal swing, bisected the earthen pyramid along with the missing nin inside. Smirking, Shinji nearly sheathed his wakizashi in confidence before he realized something was up. No notification alerted him of EXP gained, which should have occurred the moment his opponent had fallen. Which could only mean one thing. Kenta burst out of the ground next to him, his twin swords drawn and ready to bisect Shinji horizontally like the genin had tried doing. I knew you were going to do that, punk. Now die. The missing nin yelled victoriously, knowing that the first of his 4 targets would soon perish by his hands. At least, until he spotted crimson-red eyes glaring at him through the dust and smoke. That's. His thought could not be completed as the next thing he knew, the red eyes that had been glaring at him was replaced with the lovely brown irises he was intimately familiar with. The smallish figure of his genin opponent was replaced with the appearance of his dead lover. Mickey. No, she's already dead. You bastard. Kenta realized he had somehow been trapped in a genjutsu. His hesitance vanished and his swords continued on its initial trajectory and proceeded to cut through Mickey. To his dismay, blood gurgled out of the Mickey who had received the slashes as she gasped out, Kenta. Why you can't fool me, this is a genjutsu. Kai. Kenta stopped the flow of chakra in his body, and then applied an even stronger force to disrupt the flow of his opponent's chakra in his system. As he did so, the Mickey in front of his eyes crumbled apart before turning to dust and floating away. Tears speckled Kenta's eyes, who had forced himself to say goodbye to his illusionary lover, even though he desperately wanted to remain with her, even if it was just a genjutsu. A wakizashi smoothly slid into Kenta's throat. The wielder, Shinji, calmly stood beside the missing nin, his arm thrusted forward holding the sword. His red eyes morphed back into his usual black as the genin deactivated his Sharingan. Sharingan, genjutsu, success. This was the second person he had ever used the technique on, the only other one being Sajuk due to his self-imposed restriction on revealing his Sharingan. The only reason he felt comfortable using his Daojutsu was solely based on the fact that the dust and smoke from the explosion had yet to dissipate. Meaning outside observers watching from behind the opaque cover, namely his teammates and Asuma, would not be able to see him using his Sharingan. Blood poured out profusely from the missing nin's fatal injury as Shinji ripped out his wakizashi. Despite it being a vertical wound, Shinji had accurately stabbed through the two carotid arteries running up Kenta's neck, one on each side. This resulted in massive and profuse blood loss in mere seconds of the perforation. Under the effects of his observe, Shinji could see Kenta's HP rapidly dropping as blood continued to pour out from his severed arteries. Wanting to cut things short and end the man's suffering, Shinji allowed chakra to flow into his wakizashi one last time and prepared to behead the man who had seemingly lost all will to live. So, this is how it all ends. Miki, I'm coming to join you. Kenta wheezed out, coughing out blood while forcing out those words, falling to his knees. Blood had already filled up his throat, which made speech nearly impossible. It was the result of sheer will and determination which allowed Kenta to force out his last words. Yes. Be at peace, Kenta. Shinji spoke, trying to provide some semblance of comfort. Now that the battle was over, there was no longer a need to taunt his opponent and be needlessly cruel. Rather, Shinji respected Kenta's decision to stand his ground and avenge his dead lover. When the missing nin had hid in the ground following the explosion, he had every opportunity to try and escape by tunneling through the earth. Not to say that he would not have been caught by Asuma regardless, but there was something about Kenta's resolve that Shinji respected. A painless death was the least he deserved after that. With a single motion, Shinji's sword descended. In one swift stroke, the head of Kenta, the missing nin from Tanigakyo, was detached from his neck, allowing him to depart the world of the living in search for his deceased partner. Plus 12,038 EXP. The EXP rewarded was more than he had received from a single source aside from quests. An amount befitting the death of a level 48 opponent. Shinji wasn't sure whether enemies killed outside of dungeons provided more EXP, since it seemed disproportionate to EXP he got from dungeon bosses, even after factoring in level differences. But now wasn't the time to theorize about this and that. Shinji may have entered the fight excited to test himself against a worthy opponent, but now all he could think to do was pay his respect to an enemy who had given him a worthy fight and died a proper death by his own hands. The dust cleared soon after, and the rest of Team 10 upon seeing Shinji standing victorious over the headless body of the missing nin silently cheered and ran to join the genin. Asuma smiled proudly, never once doubting that his protege would succeed, even though it did seem relatively dangerous at times. Shinji sheathed his wakizashi and picked up the two short swords Kenta had been using, deciding to take them as trophies in remembrance of his first grand battle against a strong enemy outside the village walls. They were heavier and denser than he had been expecting and have an exotic appearance to them. The black sword had a red tortoise shell pattern on its blade, whereas the white one had a silver wave pattern engraved on its blade. Casting, observe, on them, he widened his eyes in shock as he read the information. Kanshou and Bakuya, twin swords, grade, unique. Ancient weapons created by a long-forgotten swordsmith, an ancestor of the founder of Takumi village that is well known for its skill in making weaponry. They were crafted more for the sake of crafting, as if questioning the meaning of the swordsmith, than for any real idea behind their creation. Their quality and ability as swords are high due to being made with the best materials and soul of a true craftsman. They are identical in shape with the only difference being their color. Durability, 389/420. Damage, A. STR plus 30. DEX plus 30. Item Skill 1, Anguish of Kanshou. When fighting with both Kanshou and Bakuya, every attack increases attack speed by 1% up to a limit of 100%. The stacked attack speed increase will drop by 1% every second the user is not attacking. Item Skill 2, Sorrow of Bakuya. When fighting with both Kanshou and Bakuya, every attack increases movement speed by 1% up to a limit of 100%. The stacked movement speed increase will drop by 1% every second the user is not attacking. Who could have predicted he would find such amazing weapons in a random encounter? It was an unexpected but welcome surprise. As he turned to greet his teammates who had come to congratulate him, his heart skipped a beat when he saw Hinata. Not because of her striking beauty or anything like that, but because he saw that her Byakugan was activated. If Hinata had been watching my fight the whole time with her Byakugan, then would she not have seen me use my Sharingan? Shinji came to a dreadful realization. Trepidation filled my heart, and my head went to the worst-case scenario, like Hinata pointing an accusatory finger at me in front of the team and demanding to know why I could use the Sharingan. However, that did not come to be. Instead, she calmly deactivated her Byakugan and proceeded to shyly congratulate me on winning against a legitimately strong, Chunin-level opponent. She, along with Shino and Asuma, praised my fighting ability, and that was that. No accusations, no suspicious glances, nothing. I had considered the possibility that she only activated her Byakugan after I turned off my Sharingan, or she simply missed it somehow. But those theories were only grasping at straws. Hinata knew. She had to know. But she didn't confront me or anything. Why? Was it just her subdued personality that held her back from asking questions? Or something more sinister? I had to find out. So as we collected the bodies of the missing nin, Asuma used a storage ceiling scroll to keep the corpses. I turned an eye towards Hinata and used observe on her. The results were shocking to say the least. Hyuga Hinata LV25. HP 5238/5238. CP 6125/6125. Hinata is a kunoichi of Konohagakure as well as the heiress of the Hyuga clan. She is a soft-spoken and polite child when she is outside the realm of her professional duties. However, when push comes to shove, she exhibits a competency in the ninja arts as is expected of an heiress of a prestigious clan. Although her self-confidence has been slowly building over the years, she still lacks an assertiveness and decisiveness that is required for Hinata to truly flourish as a kunoichi. This is mainly due to her waiting for the recognition and true acknowledgement of her beloved. She is in the early stages of an obsessive devotion to you. What the fuck? For some time I thought the system was broken, or it was pranking me, or a dozen other reasons why it would show me something that was just simply so absurd. Because it just didn't make sense. Obsessive devotion, the system reported. First off, both the words obsessive and devotion connotated a strong, nearly fanatical, love for someone. And that just didn't track with what I knew of Hinata's personality through the anime. I mean, sure, she would occasionally watch Naruto from afar for many years silently and secretly, and, okay, I guess it does sort of track. But how in the world would the target of her affections shift towards me instead of Naruto? If I remembered it correctly, wasn't he the one who went to her defense when she was being bullied by some kids when she was younger? Why and how did that change? Even if I thought back to our years in the academy, and the months we have spent together as a team, Hinata never exhibited any signs of an affection that resembled her obsessive devotion towards me, right? Wait, now that I think about it. The long looks, the stolen glances, crimson flushes whenever we spoke, and that one time she fainted when I held her wrist to show how to properly throw shuriken. Oh God, how could I have missed this, especially with my observe skill? I didn't have a habit of using observe on my friends and teammates since I was confident I already knew all I needed to know about them, but, oh God, the conceit and hubris was too much for me to bear. Hold on, could it even be considered love when the system specifically labeled it as a devotion? I mean, it could lean more towards loyalty than any sort of a romantic affection, right? And just because the system reports it that way, doesn't mean it was the sole truth. Humans and emotions are complicated. Things change. Especially hormonal teenage girls who have fleeting attention spans. Damn it, who am I kidding? If Hinata was a hormonal teenage girl who had a fleeting attention span, the object of her fancy would have long shifted to someone else when Naruto was on his 3-year training trip. No, if anything, the term devotion sounds rather fitting for someone like her. So I can only come to the conclusion that Hyuga Hinata is in love with me. This is just too much to handle. I'm not the one she is supposed to be in love with, it's Naruto. They are the ones who are supposed to be together. She was supposed to throw herself in harm's way to save Naruto from pain, and then subsequently confess her love, and they were supposed to get married. Oh God, how is this happening? I had to concede that I have committed an irreversible error in changing so much of the canon timeline. Damn you, butterfly. And now she even knows the secret of my Sharingan and an easily deduced Uchiha ancestry. But strangely enough, she showed no visible reaction to learning of my Daojutsu. To which I could only come to the conclusion that she must have known it for some time. If Hinata was anything like her canon self, even though my existence has assuredly changed much of the future, she might have followed me one day and just like today, saw my Sharingan with her own Daojutsu. That meant she must have known about it for some time now. If so, judging by how I have not yet been questioned by any of the village executives, she must have not told anyone else about it either. But for me to truly be sure, I had to speak with the girl. Which would also mean confronting Hinata about her supposed obsessive devotion to me, and that was not a conversation I was looking forward to. Not here nor now, obviously. When we get back to the village, I will have to find a time and private place to have a chat with her. We returned to the village soon after, though we did stop by a bounty station before heading back to Konoha. Asuma had on him a bingo book, and after looking through it, we found the entries of the 2 Tanigakure missing nin within. So he made the decision to bring us to the bounty station, to show us the ropes and process involved in capturing wanted targets or turning in their corpses for money. There, we collected the bounties that were placed on the 2. They weren't worth much, the sum of their bounties totaled a measly 55,000 ryo. The one named Kenta was worth 35,000 by himself, while the other, the woman named Miki, was worth 20,000. Asuma had suggested that I take the entire sum, his reasoning being that since I was the one who dealt the killing blow on both of them, it rightfully belonged to me. However, I rejected his suggestion and opted to share it with everyone equally. I reasoned that I would not have been able to do it alone, so everyone deserved the reward for taking the 2 missing nin down as well. We arrived at the village slightly after noon. Asuma dismissed us and gave us the next day off for some rest and recuperation before he headed off to submit the mission report. Us genin also broke up to go back to our own homes respectively, though I stopped Hinata before she left. Hinata, since we have the day off, do you want to meet up later in the evening for dinner? I have something I want to talk to you about. I asked, carefully monitoring her expression. She immediately turned red as a tomato, and sputtered out, "LL later. Me and Shinji-kun. Meet up. Talk. Like a DD date." How was I so blind to have not seen this? Hindsight really was 20/20. I prided myself as someone who was perceptive enough to see through others as easily as reading a book. But the fact that I had not noticed such an obvious crush, meant that I truly was conceited. I was so caught up on what was supposed to happen in canon and relied so heavily on my knowledge of future events that ironically I became completely blind to the changes that have happened as a result of my intervention. Truly, I was a conceited fool. I waited for her answer. She really was taking her own sweet time, between the mumbling, blushing and an obviously overactive imagination as the girl seemingly played out what might possibly happen tomorrow over and over in her head. "Oh, of course, Shinji-kun. I would love to meet you. But what do you want to talk about?" She replied, looking excited beyond measure but also a tinge of nervousness, uncertainty and expectation. I smiled, trying to be as gentle and unassuming as I could so as to not divulge my motivations for wanting to speak with her. "Great. I'll see you later then. Just come on over to my place, I'll cook for you. You know where I live, right? As for what I want to talk about, well, you'll know later." She eagerly nodded, "MMHMM. I can't wait, Shinji-kun." I bid her goodbye as she positively bounced home in exuberance. And as I watched her leave, I did not forget to maintain the smile on my face. Now that I knew she could be watching me at any time, betraying my inner thoughts through my facial expressions was not a luxury I could continue having. Her Byakugan made her both an excellent tracker and an excellent spy as well. I wasn't sure if she was just flustered or caught up in the moment, but she had fallen for a verbal trap just a moment ago when I asked if she knew where I lived. Sure, she should probably be aware that my current living arrangements, after graduating from the academy, was in a shinobi-only apartment complex. But as far as I knew, I had never told her or shown her which apartment I was in. Yet she confidently answered that she knew where I lived, without following up on just which apartment I was in. Even the most dull-witted person could figure out how she could have known this without me explicitly telling her before, especially with her habit of following and watching the object of her affections. This girl is dangerous. And as I headed to the nearest grocery store to stock up on the ingredients I was going to use, I started thinking about how I was going to go about dealing with her. Knock, knock asterisk. Just a second. I yelled out, as I took out the pizza from the oven using a wooden paddle and let it rest on the countertop. Pizza was a dish that I had longed to have ever since I reincarnated into the Narutoverse. And to my utter horror and dismay, it was nowhere to be found in this world. Rightfully so, since this world's cuisine leaned more towards Japanese than anything else. So I experimented with a trial-and-error method to recreate the recipe from scratch. It turned out to be a fruitful endeavor. The dough was the hardest part to get right. The flour they used to make bread in this world just did not replicate the flavor I remembered from the memories of my previous life. So I had to try out a bunch of different flour to get a pizza dough that best resembled what I remembered. Olive oil, which I roughly recalled was also an ingredient in a traditional pizza, was replaced with sesame oil. While the tomato sauce also had to be made and recreated from memory, which was actually really tricky. Other than that, the cheese, mushrooms and onions were all store-bought. The result was a pizza that closely resembled what I regularly ate back in my previous life, although it was a hair off the genuine product. Still, it was pretty good for something homemade and recreated in a world without the proper ingredients available. I went to open the door still wearing my apron, only to be greeted with the sight of Hinata in a lavender-colored sundress and matching sandals. "Gee, good evening, Shinji-kun," she greeted before noticing my apron. Sorry, did I arrive too early?" "Nope, you're just in time. Come in and make yourself comfortable. I'm just about to set the table," I answered before ushering her in, closing the door behind her. She took off her sandals and looked around in awe, though I didn't see just what she was so in awe about. My home was a studio apartment that closely resembled where I was living in when I was still in the academy. After graduating, I was no longer eligible to continue staying in the student dormitory. So I found a new place in the Shinobi district, renting it at a low cost that was subsidized by the village. Another one of the perks Konoha Shinobi received for our service. "Please, let me help," Hinata requested. I waved her off. "No need. You're a guest. Allow me." Seeing my insistence, she quietly nodded and sat at the couch in my living room. Her eyes were still wandering around the flat, though I was pretty sure she should have seen it before with her Byakugan when she was undoubtedly watching me from outside. The table was set pretty quickly, and I took out the 12-inch pizza from the kitchen, which was really just on the other side of the living room. I invited Hinata to join me at the dinner table as I began cutting the pizza into 8 slices. "This is?" she asked, not having ever seen such a dish before. In this world, I could be seen as the person who invented this creation. Shinji Ikari, inventor of pizza and other Gaijin cuisine. "My own invention," I answered, serving her a slice of pizza, bread with tomato sauce, cheese, mushroom and onions on top, baked in an oven. "Try it and tell me what you think." She nodded mutely and took a hesitant bite of the pizza as a few strings of cheese stretched from the bite. It only took 1 or 2 uncertain chews before her eyes lit up as the unfamiliar tanginess of the tomato sauce, decadence of the cheese, crunchiness of the onions and umami of the mushroom all blended together into mouth-watering perfection. "The ish so good," she remarked with her mouth full, causing her words to be muffled slightly. I watched her finish the slice of pizza with gusto, with a satisfied smile as I took a bite of my own. She might have thought it was amazing, but to me, who have had literally the best pizza in New York or anywhere else in the world before, it was only subpar. The tomato didn't have the richness and sweetness only San Marzano tomatoes possessed. The dough was lacking the distinctive flavor and texture of traditional pizza dough, and the cheese itself was also not up to my usual standards. Overall, it was a disappointing replica that did not match up to how pizza should taste in my memories. She seemed to like it though, so I guess it wasn't a complete failure. As we continued eating, sprinkling in bits of conversation here and there, the pizza was quickly finished. Hinata had been slightly nervous at the start of the dinner date, but I observed her easing into comfort and familiarity as time went on. Her speech lost her distinctive, trademark stutter, and she was now able to look me right in the eyes instead of anywhere else like before. I then figured it was time to get down to the real reason why I had invited her to my home this evening. We had settled into a comfortable silence when my smile faded and a serious countenance replaced it. "Hinata, I would like to ask you something." and I would like it if you would be honest with me. She blinked and looked at me in bewilderment before her face reddened completely. I didn't need my observe or any sort of mind-reading skill to figure out what she was thinking. A romantic dinner date at my place and me asking her a question in this type of atmosphere. The girl must have gotten the wrong idea about the question I wanted to ask her. Unfortunately for her, it would not go the way she was imagining in her head. Oh, of course, Shinji-kun. I would never lie to you. Hinata responded, the stutter that had faded a while back now returning full force. I looked her right in her eyes, a pair of mostly white pupils with a tinge of light purple. Hinata, you saw it, didn't you? I could see the look of expectation crumble when the question I asked was not what she had been expecting. Saw it? What do you mean? She asked, the disappointment palpable in her tone as well as a confusion from the unexpected question. I thought she would understand the moment I asked the question, but it seemed I would have to prod a little further. When I was fighting the Tanigakure missing nin. After the fight was over, I noticed that your Bakugan was activated. You were watching me fight, weren't you? I pressed. It seemed that she misunderstood the intent of my question or missed the point entirely as she smiled brightly. Of course I would. Watching Shinji-kun is I always learn a lot watching you fight. I shook my head, that is not what I meant. I am asking if you saw me use it. Hinata still looked perplexed for a moment before realization dawned on her what I was referring to. She must have seen me use the Sharingan so many times that she didn't even think it was something special or worthy of mention anymore. Again, I had to curse myself for being so blind. Why you mean? She hesitantly uttered, her eyes a flood of emotions: anxiety, unease, trepidation, expectancy, tension, and a myriad others I could not identify at that moment. Yes. I am asking. I began, as my black eyes morphed into the distinctive red of the Sharingan, if you saw these eyes of mine. Her breath hitched, as her eyes widened at the sight of mine before she calmed down a little too quickly. If you asked me. She looked down, the shadow from her bangs covering her eyes before I noticed her lips curled up into a smile. Looking back up at me, she tilted her head as her eyes and lips formed into a twisted expression of joy and delight. Shinji-kun, I'm so happy. I'm so happy that you finally trust me enough to show them to me. I held back a gulp. As I deduced, this girl must have known about my Sharingan for a while now. Since when have you known? Her smile widened. Since we were in the academy. I, accidentally came across you sparring against Sajuk, and it just so happened that I had my Byakugan active. That was when I first saw you use your Sharingan. Ever since then She trailed off before blushing deeply once more, as though recalling something that was equal parts embarrassing and lovely. Have you told anyone? I asked. This was the thing I was most curious and also fearful about. I needed to know if I would have to explain my circumstances to anyone else or try to defend my reasons for hiding it. It was just way too troublesome for me to handle right now, and dangerous as well since I still lacked the strength to protect myself against the truly deadly foes. She shook her head anxiously, as if fearing that I would have the wrong idea. No. I never told anyone. Your secret is safe with me, Shinji-kun. I would never betray your trust. What trust? I only told you because I feared that you already saw it for yourself. I stared at her for a moment, wondering whether I should take her word for it. Ultimately, after seeing the look on her face and recalling the words, obsessive devotion the system had used to describe her feelings for me, I decided to trust what she said. I breathed out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Hinata. It heartens me to hear that. Thank you. She similarly looked relieved that I did not accuse her of spilling my secrets. No, Shinji-kun. Why are you keeping it a secret, if you don't mind my asking? Because it's troublesome, would have been my most truthful response. Do you recall what happened to Sajuke's clan, or rather, my clan? I asked, fully admitting to being at the very least part Uchiha. She nodded hesitantly. Yes, they were all killed by Sajuke's older brother. I sighed, looking troubled. Indeed. The primary motivation in keeping my lineage a secret is mainly a fear for my life. Uchiha Itakai, an S-ranked missing nin wanted for massacring his entire clan, sparing only his brother, before escaping the village. I am worried that upon hearing the news that there is another living Uchiha in the village other than his brother, he will come back to finish the job. Her eyes widened at the revelation. No. I would never let that happen to you. She declared, a vigor and conviction rarely seen in the young Hyuga heiress. I smiled helplessly. I am touched to hear that, Hinata. Truly. But if an S-ranked missing nin did indeed intend on taking my life, I'm afraid there is little neither you nor I could do about it. She looked like she wanted to retort what I had said, but conceded that it was a simple fact. If Itakai truly wanted to kill me, there was nothing Genin could do to change his mind. Of course, Hinata had no way of knowing Itakai was still a shinobi loyal to Konoha, but still, there was no telling what he would do to stay in the perceived good graces of Akatsuki if ordered to eliminate me. Then, tell the Hokage. He can keep you safe. She rebutted. I shook my head once more. True. I would certainly be safe if I just stayed in the village to be monitored and shadowed by Anbu bodyguards 24/7. But what kind of life would that be? Being kept locked up within these walls, paranoid for my safety, the village leaders too afraid to lose me to let me venture out the village. Such a pitiful existence, what would be the point of living? She grabbed my hand, and squeezed in what she must have thought to be a comforting manner. Don't say that, Shinji-kun. There is still so much to live for. I chuckled and patted her head like I would a concerned puppy. Don't be silly, Hinata. Of course I know that too. That is why I would not want to risk anyone else knowing this secret of mine, so I would not be confined to a meager existence within the village. She blushed at the contact but also looked like she deeply enjoyed it. So I immediately retracted my hand. I didn't want her to get the wrong idea, after all. She blushed at the contact but also looked like she deeply enjoyed it. So I immediately retracted my hand. I didn't want her to get the wrong idea, after all. Why are you so sure that telling the Sun Dame would immediately result in the news being spread throughout the world? He could train you so that you would become strong enough to fend him off and at the same time not let anyone else know. I am sure he would keep the secret as well if it meant keeping you safe and protected from Itakai. She spat out his name with such venom that it surprised even me. Oh dear. Of course I also thought of that alternative. Receiving training from the village's best shinobi would certainly be extremely useful in my goal of acquiring strength beyond measure. However, what she didn't and couldn't have known about was the existence of one-man Danza, the man with a dozen Sharinganais surgically embedded into his arm that was also enhanced with Senju Hashirama's DNA. The relationship between Hiruzen and Danza at this current juncture was ambiguous. Root, Danza's own personal subdivision of the Anbu, was created with Hiruzen's permission and for years he ignored Root's questionable foreign ops, abduction of children and various other dubious actions they took. Although the Sundame ordered Danza to disband Root after learning of his ordering of Itakai to kill his entire clan, he still tolerated the man's existence, and even at times leaned on him and his advice. If asked whether I was 100% sure Hiruzen would not divulge my Uchiha lineage to Danza, I could not unequivocally say I was certain that would be the case. And if he did tell Danza, there was no telling what that man would do in order to gain access to a pair of fresh Sharingan eyes which also belonged to someone with an abnormal physique, which is the gamer's body. I was not like Sasuke, who had the backing of his monstrous brother that had threatened Danza into leaving alone before he left the village. I did not have an S-ranked shinobi that would go to bat for me and disregard their lives in order to slaughter Danza and his root shinobi. As such, I could only conclude that before I myself attained that strength, Hiruzen, and especially Danza, could not find out about my Uchiha blood. But this was also a conclusion that I could not share with Hinata, since I had no logical way of knowing all this without my meta-knowledge. So I could only come up with another excuse. Espionage, Hinata. I answered, infiltration, spies, subterfuge. Not even the Sundame himself could be sure that there existed no foreign operatives or malicious agents that have infiltrated Konoha who might spread this news to their masters. Which is why anyone other than yourself and Sasuke knowing would be one too many. What about Asuma-sensei? Shouldn't he be told as well? So that he could keep you safe. Why is this girl so insistent on me telling everyone who I really was? Seriously, does she want me to get hunted down by Danza, Orochimaru, Obito and Madara, just to name a few of the monsters that would undoubtedly be interested in my existence? Asuma-sensei is the son of our Hokage. I may trust the man with my life, but again, I can't be 100% certain he will keep my secret if he thinks that telling his father would be more beneficial to the village. He might even tell the Sundame if he thought that was the best outcome for me, however misguided he may be. I answered. She had on a look of understanding, albeit slightly reluctant. I would assume that obsessive devotion meant she would just take my words as gospel, though the system did mention that she was in the early stages of it. Of course, when I was preparing dinner earlier in the day, a few stray thoughts did pop into my head regarding to what extent was she devoted to me. Could she be manipulated and molded to my liking, turned into a servant that obeyed without question, I wondered. It would be so easy to, especially if she developed the later stages of her obsessive devotion to me. I struck myself in the head once or twice with a flour-covered rolling pin whenever those insidious thoughts entered my mind. I had to remind myself that I was no longer the man I used to be, one who would look at the people around me and appraise them for their usefulness. That was a me that had been raised by opportunistic narcissists to become a person exactly like my parents. It was only through a stroke of extreme fortune that I was granted another chance and another life. One that I would not squander by pretending I was still the same person before I had reincarnated. I may have impulsively chosen to reincarnate thinking it was all just a dream, but that didn't mean I was going to wake up from one at any moment. After living in this world for nearly 5 years, I could no longer see this world as just a game and its inhabitants NPCs. They were living, breathing people, who had their own thoughts, hopes and dreams. Just like that family whose farm I razed to the ground, Kenta and Mickey, whose love for each other was as genuine as the air I breathed, and the girl before me now, looking at me with such a hopeful and loving gaze. To do something as despicable, and as heinous as twisting the mind of this child, was utterly reprehensible and disgusting. I would never claim to be a paragon of morality and righteousness, but neither was I a repugnant, repulsive monster like certain individuals in this world. There were lines I played jump rope with, but there were also lines I would never cross. Manipulating someone, especially one as kind-hearted and pure as Hinata, was something only a monster would attempt. So what now, was the question on my mind. Hinata knew my secret, and my reasoning behind why I wanted it kept that way. And I believed her when she said she would not tell anyone. Over the comfortable silence of a shared secret, I mulled over the next steps to take before Hinata broke the quiet. Her eyelids quivered and her cheeks reddened. "Shinji-kun, Hinata breathily spoke, lips trembling in trepidation but her voice hopeful. "Could it be? Oh fuck, is this what I think it is? No. God no. Perhaps the dread that I was feeling came over my face, or it could be that she decided this was not the best time to say what she initially wanted to say, but what I was worried she would say was not spoken. I'll protect you, Shinji-kun. No matter what," she uttered with a certainty and decisiveness that washed away the previous impression I had of her. The fire in her eyes burned hotter than the heaven-devouring flames of Amaterasu as she continued, "Be it Uchiha Itachi or any foreign agents with malicious intent. Regardless of who they are, I will slaughter them if anyone tries to harm you. This, I swear to you." Thank God. I suppressed the heavy sigh of relief. Instead, I smiled at her and replied, "Thank you, Hinata. I promise to protect you too. No matter who or what comes our way." This was a genuine promise that I intended to uphold. For a moment I had thought Hinata would confess her affections for me. That would have been troubling. I simply did not see her in that way. Perhaps in 2 or 3 years, but right now. All I could see when I looked at her was a 13-year-old child. Even if I was in the body of a 13-year-old myself, it's just too big of a cognitive dissonance for me to accept her confession. Emotionally, I could perhaps say that I loved her like a brother would, a distant brother that spent most of his time living abroad. But sexually, she did nothing for me. Absolutely nothing. That was not to say all relationships, especially one between preteens like ourselves, had a sexual component to it. But one could not deny that there had to be an element of physical attraction as the foundation of a successful relationship. And physically, I was not attracted to her at all. The reason why I was so dreading a sudden confession from her was that I would have hated having to reject her advances right after our heartfelt conversation. I was afraid I might just accept her confession and blurt out, "I like you too," or something similar out of sheer awkwardness. Saying I reciprocated her affections when I truly didn't, at least not at this point in time, would just be a dick move. Giving her a half-assed excuse would also be tantamount to stringing her along and playing with her feelings. That would just be taking advantage of a young and naive child who wasn't emotionally mature enough to understand what a healthy relationship entailed. I wasn't afraid that she might go out spilling my secrets if I rejected her. Hinata wasn't a person like that. I hope. What I was afraid of was hurting her feelings, damaging her psyche, and cutting down the self-confidence that she had so painstakingly built up. Which was why I was relieved when she didn't confess. Ideally, I would want to slowly ease her out of her obsessive devotion to me. Something like that was assuredly unhealthy. Because who knows how she would react if I rejected her. Turning to self-harm or suicidal ideation was not a far-fetched conclusion. No, I would never let it descend into something like that. Yet at the same time, I wasn't a psychiatrist or therapist. I didn't know the first thing about preteen psychology and how to fix her unhealthy obsession with me that I have inadvertently caused. So right now I could only take things one step at a time while making sure I did not make things worse. because if any harm befell the girl as a result of my actions or even inaction, I doubt I would ever be able to forgive myself. The night ended soon after her declaration. Our dinner date concluding with us still as friends, comrades and teammates. Which was perhaps the best ending I could have hoped for. For now at least. Weeks passed after my talk with Hinata, and on the surface nothing much changed after we spoke. Hinata became a lot more decisive and confident after our conversation, and sure enough her status information changed accordingly to reflect that. Team 10 continued undertaking missions, though only D ranks since there was a limit to how many C rank missions a freshly graduated genin team like us could take. And I continued accumulating EXP from these missions as well as other quests generated by the system. My stats and skill levels continued growing under Asuma's wing as well, learning new jutsu and even creating some skills of my own. To prevent myself from being so blind once more, I began using observe regularly on the people around me. Fortunately enough, there were no other surprise confessions awaiting me aside from the more obvious ones like Kaori. Speaking of whom, I occasionally found the time to catch up with the girl. After failing the true genin exam along with Sakura, they were attached to the unofficial genin corps where the two of them were tested once more for their aptitudes, so that the village could know where to assign them that best fit their talents. The result was that Sakura was assigned to the Konoha hospital to undergo an apprenticeship with the various medicnin working there. The village judged that with her excellent chakra control and strong memory, the path of medicine was the most suited for her. It was good that her talent was not wasted in some other branch. Though she may not be learning from the best of the best, that is Tsunade of the Sanin. Hopefully when the legendary Slug Queen returned to the village, Sakura might be able to get her attention with her talent. Kaori on the other hand, that girl had it the roughest. According to what she said, the village found her to be completely devoid of anything that resembled talent. Chakra reserves, pitiful. Chakra control, which because her minuscule reserves should be excellent, subpar. Physical competences, see chakra reserves. Intellect, nothing to write home about. This was the fate of a person judged to be below mediocre, not even reaching the standards of the most ordinary shinobi. People like her weren't exactly rare. You know, people who did not excel or were even considered mediocre at any one discipline. It was extremely unfortunate. However, there was nothing Shinji could do about it. Sure, he felt sorry listening to her story, and he extended his deepest sympathies for her plight. But how could he help a person who had absolutely zero aptitude in the shinobi arts? Look at Rock Lee for example. While he lacked any talent whatsoever in ninjutsu and taijutsu, he excelled at martial arts and physical ability. Not to mention his tenacity and sheer bullheadedness when it came to training. His skill and proficiency in chakra enhancement absolutely dwarfed any other genin his age, with a possible exception being myself. So while he may have been mocked as being a talentless ninja, it was simply an absolute falsehood. No one could label him as being talentless until they encountered Kaori, who, objectively speaking, was the epitome of talentless. As a result of her lack of talent or even mediocrity in any field, she was assigned to an administrative role in Konoha. Specifically, the janitorial department. Officially, she was the shinobi liaison for a department made up entirely of civilian workers. Unofficially, she was the coffee girl. Someone who would never see any real action on the battlefield because the village judged her as too much of a liability to even act as cannon fodder. Furthermore, it was already too late for her to drop out from being a shinobi. Having received the monthly stipend from the village and sponsored education at the Shinobi Academy for 4 whole years, The moment she graduated, Kaori was locked into a contract that compelled her to fulfill her part of the bargain. Unlike the other kids who had parents who could pay for the expensive tuition fees the Shinobi Academy charged for their tutelage, Kaori received the equivalent of a bonded scholarship. Meaning, while other Shinobi could retire even a month after graduation, provided they signed the equivalent of a non-compete agreement, Kaori did not have that luxury. 5 years was her minimum term of service before she was allowed to retire. 10 years if she wanted the generous pension schemes and tax deductibles. Anything less than that required debilitating illness or crippling injury to waive off the contracted years. Calling it a slave contract would be too much, since she received appropriate compensation proportionate to the work she did, plus she did also receive a monthly stipend and a fully sponsored education during her time at the academy. But given that her work amounted to bringing coffee to her superiors and other employees at the janitorial department, her salary was a pittance compared to the other genin completing actual missions. Sufficient for her basic subsistence, but not much left over for luxuries or even savings. Hearing her story, I couldn't help but thank the stars above that I was not reincarnated without the gamer system. Otherwise, I would undoubtedly have been as pitiful as her, given my utter lack of talent without the system artificially boosting my capabilities. Except for cooking, that was one thing I was confident in excelling at even without the gamer system. But being a chef in the Naruverse is just a wasted opportunity, no. All I could do was wish her luck, and if, in 5 years' time she needed financial aid or any other support, I would do my best to help her. Until then, I could only smile and listen when she needed a comforting presence or a shoulder to lean on. Anyways, today we were not undergoing another training session overseen by Asuma. Instead, we were being summoned for another C-rank mission. Thank God Team 7 were already out on the Land of Waves mission, otherwise I would have been worried Sasuke and Naruto would have missed the mission that would solidify their bond and strengthen their resolve. It was about 4 days since they left the village. Gozu and Mezu should have already been dealt with, so this should roughly be the time they encountered Zabuza, right? 4 days ago, Land of Fire, main highway to Land of Waves. It has only been half a day since Team 7, and Shikamaru has already questioned his decision to become a Shinobi in the first place 7 times. Those questions happened regularly, at roughly 30-minute intervals. Mostly a result of Naruto's incessant jabbering, Sasuke's brooding, Kakashi's nonchalance and their clients' off-putting alcoholic odor. The Naru sighed for what seemed to be the umpteenth time, wondering what a peaceful and decidedly untroublesome life he would be living right now if only he hadn't been forcefully entered into the Shinobi Academy. His team was currently on their way to the Land of Waves, escorting their client to the Land of Waves after Naruto annoyingly demanded for a C-rank mission. The loud-mouthed blonde had never let his desire to perform cooler and more exciting missions go unheard. But it got even worse when over the last few months Team 10's team went through 2 C-rank missions compared to their team's 0. That was unacceptable in Naruto's eyes, his whining growing louder and more irritating as the days of performing peaceful and tranquil D-ranks went by, until the Hokage, for some inexplicable reason, agreed to assign their team a C-rank mission. Team 7 was subsequently greeted by a foul-mouthed, drunk old man who insulted their team's competencies at first glance. That was the second time that day Shikamaru sighed deeply and commented to himself how troublesome everything was. Fast forward to now, and Shikamaru was ready to defect just so he could run away from the responsibilities of being a Shinobi, though on second thought, leading a life as a missing nin was also way more troublesome than whatever meager freedom defecting would bring him. Their journey would continue being boring, uneventful and soul-suckingly annoying, or so Shikamaru thought before he noticed an inconspicuous-looking puddle in the middle of the road. It really wasn't difficult to deduce that a trap or some sort of ambush awaited them after seeing the puddle, of which its existence was incongruous to the sunny weather they were having. Not to mention that it hadn't rained for weeks too. Seriously, was it too much to ask for a peaceful, uneventful mission? Shikamaru sighed and turned to Kakashi, noticing that Sasuke had similarly came to the same conclusion and like himself was turning to their squad leader for further instruction. "Hey! Why is there a puddle on the ground? Did it rain in the morning?" Naruto suddenly asked, pointing to the puddle. The Nara face-palmed. Ever since Team 7 and Team 10 regularly trained together in what Shinji had called inter-team training sessions, Naruto was becoming sharper when it came to spotting traps. His obvious weakness with genjutsu was ruthlessly exploited by the opposing team, so much so that Naruto had to get better at spotting inconsistencies in the environment to avoid being caught in a trap. However, it was also readily apparent that his skill at reading the atmosphere was still severely lacking. Sasuke rolled his eyes, as did Kakashi, who looked disappointed at his most mischievous student's lack of forethought. None of them were surprised when two enemy shinobi leapt out of the puddle, rebreathers covering the bottom half of their face while each were equipped with a single large, clawed gauntlet on their left and right arm respectively. A blade chain coming out of one gauntlet was attached to the other. "Die!" Gozu yelled, as they dashed towards their team. Kakashi blankly looked on, his mask concealing his expression. "Go handle them. I'll intervene if it looks like any of you kids need saving." Upon receiving his Jounin squad leader's permission, a confident smirk adorned Sasuke's face as he activated his Sharingan. "Understood. Shikamaru, plan." The Nara settled into a stance, but the tension was relieved immediately after. Their enemies were slow. Compared to Shinji, they moved at a snail's pace. "No need. Just go wild, you two. I'll back you up. Oh, and don't break their chain." The Uchiha sped forward, already unsheathing his wakizashi upon receiving the go-ahead from his team's strategist. The genin of Team 7 had clearly defined roles. Shikamaru was the tactician, strategist, and performed as a general support specialist. Naruto and Sasuke were the brawlers, the fighters, the heavy assault specialists. In other words, they were the brawn while Shikamaru was the brain. "You really think you have the time to chat?" Mezu shouted, clearly incensed over the easygoing atmosphere their targets were adopting. They may be missing Nin, abhorred for abandoning their village, but damn it, they had their pride too. "Against you punks. We could talk about the weather and still take you two fools down." Sasuke taunted as he moved into attack. His Sharingan eyes gave him absolute clarity of vision, and with this clarity was an awareness of not just how his enemies moved, but also how he should move his own body. The Uchiha weaved into range, ducking under an attempted strike from one of the demon brothers, and his wakizashi sliced into the thigh of another. "This brat!" Mezu gritted out as Sasuke's wakizashi cut into his leg. A clawed gauntlet dove towards Sasuke's chest but was parried by his blade. The poison-tipped claws clashed against his sword for a moment before Gozu opened his hand and grabbed onto the wakizashi, his armored gauntlet protecting his palm from the sharp edge. "Got you!" Gozu hissed out as his brother went in for the killing blow. Sasuke's confident smirk never left his face as before the clawed gauntlet could even reach his body, Naruto jumped in and landed a kick on Mezu's face. "Took you long enough," Sasuke remarked while channeling chakra into his family's ancestral blade, Satori, before violently ripping it out Gozu's metalled grasp while leaving a deep gash on the missing Nin's palm. "Pfft, still saved your ass, didn't I?" Naruto shot back as he formed a hand seal, Kijibunshin no Jutsu. 24 shadow clones popped into existence and moved, each settled into a fighting stance, their fists and feet pointed towards the downed Mezu. "Took you long enough," Sasuke remarked while channeling chakra into his family's ancestral blade, Satori, before violently ripping it out Gozu's metalled grasp while leaving a deep gash on the missing nin's palm. "Pfft, still saved your ass, didn't I?" Naruto shot back as he formed a hand seal, Kijibunshin no Jutsu. 24 shadow clones popped into existence and moved, each settled into a fighting stance, their fists and feet pointed towards the downed Mezu. Rather than charging in, as was his usual strategy before, Shinji hammered battle tactics and a conservative fighting style into his head. Naruto now positioned his clones in tactically advantageous formations as exemplified by the shadow clones currently surrounding Mezu in a circular formation, with 2 concentric circles of clones with each staggered to reveal no loopholes. Naruto was also careful not to rush in to attack a downed enemy, a painful lesson learned in those very same inter-team training sessions when an over-eager assault more often than not landed him in more trouble than before. Smart too, because Mezu had been biding his time, waiting for his opponent, a foolish genin, to rush in and get cut down by his claws. The missing nin, upon realizing the dumb-looking kid was sharper than he expected, picked himself and looked around at the clones surrounding him. The first step when facing an enemy using the elementary Bunshin Jutsu was to spot for the real one's shadow, since the illusionary clones were not able to cast their own. It was a simple tactic to find the original without wasting time tearing through the clones, a simple tactic that the kid's sensei must have forgotten to teach him, Mezu sneeringly thought. But as he looked around him, he realized he made one mistake: those weren't illusionary clones. All of the blonde, orange jumpsuit-wearing clones surrounding him casted their own shadow. Which meant that the 24 genin around him were all physical ones. Mitsu Bunshin. Not enough water. Then they must be Sachi Bunshin. This is bad. They are sturdier than even their original creator, but the trade-off being they aren't smart enough for autonomous action. But I can't use jutsu with this gauntlet on my arm, and I can't perform single-handed seals like Haku. No choice but to. Mezu concluded before pulling on his blade chain using the gauntlet they were attached to, his intention being to rip through a portion of the clones before they attacked. However, his arm was stuck in mid-air as the chain refused to budge. His eyes trailed down before noticing the chain being stepped on by one of the clones, or the original, with the kid's full weight holding it down. "You must think I'm dumb, ha, if you think I would let you use that chain," Naruto jeered, as the clones around him clenched their fist and moved forward. Even if he wasn't as strategically brilliant as Shikamaru, the blonde could still recognize an opportunity when he saw one. The horde of shadow clones rushed forward, while Naruto himself hung back. There was no point in him risking injury when he had more than enough chakra capacity to support the creation of hundreds more clones. If it came down to a war of attrition, Naruto could boast that he would lose to no one, not even Shinji. Mezu cursed and clicked a mechanism that detached the chain. With it being held down, it would only do more harm than good having it attached to his gauntlet. With his freedom of mobility now returned, Mezu turned to slaughter what he thought were Sachi Bunshin. Over on the other side, after Sasuke carved into Gozu's palm, the missing nin had hissed in pain and made to retreat from the Uchiha. But Sasuke followed closely, not letting his opponent a chance to breathe. Gozu was forced to evade slashes that became narrower and narrower to avoid with every passing second. The genin before him was not only fast, but he moved like he knew each and every movement Gozu wanted to make. Which made sense, since the kid was actually a goddamn Uchiha. He thought those bastards were supposed to be extinct. Their mission was supposed to be simple: kill a drunk bridge builder and get paid. Easy money. How in the world they ended up fighting against a freaking Uchiha was beyond him. The Demon Brothers' forte had never been prolonged, head-on combat. Even when they were promoted to Chunin back when they were still loyal shinobi of Kirigakyo, it was only on the basis of their assassination techniques rather than pure combat ability. Their modus operandi was always to strike first, deliver a sneak attack, kill their target and retreat, not staying any longer than was necessary. Trained by Momokai's abuser, the demon of the hidden mist himself, who was recognized as the greatest master of silent killing, the Demon Brothers were assassins first and fighters second. Being forced into head-to-head combat meant that their mission success rate was getting slimmer and slimmer. From the corner of his eyes, Gozu spotted his brother taking on a dozen clones, and they weren't illusionary ones by the looks of it. This was getting dangerous. He had to go help his brother and then kill the target before escaping, all the while evading this dam. You think you can afford to look away? Sasuke derided, his fingers flashing forward and flinging a couple of chakra-enhanced shurikens towards Gozu. The speed and sound of the wind whistling signaled to Gozu that those shuriken weren't normal ones, having seen and heard the sound of chakra-enhanced projectiles on multiple occasions. Gozu recognized them for what they were. And he knew that blocking with his gauntlet would only see his hand shredded apart. Lacking the ability to use chakra flow himself, the missing nin could only dive out of the way at the last second, before skillfully manipulating the chain attached to his gauntlet to whip towards his enemy. Unfortunately for Gozu, however, Sasuke's Sharingan could see right through that surprise attack, letting him stick a kunai through one of the links and forcefully pull Gozu towards him. Get over here. Gozu, who felt his arm being pulled, was quick to detach the chain with the same mechanism Mezu used as well. Sasuke could only pull on the chain, now missing the intended recipient for his sword to pierce through. The missing nin took the opportunity to rush towards Tazuna, concluding that if they could kill their target, even if they were captured afterwards, the mission objective would at least be accomplished. In front of his target was another boy, obviously less experienced than his cohorts, judging by the fact that he did not join his teammates. Their sensei hung back a distance away, merely observing. Big mistake. Gozu sprinted at Tazuna, his clawed arm cocked back, ready to take his target's life. As long as he could move faster than the kid could react, he would succeed. Was what he thought before his movements froze. Gozu's eyes widened, as he tried to force his body to move. But it was only a futile attempt. Kijmain no jutsu success. Shikamaru confidently uttered, his hands together in a rat seal and his shadow extended like a blade across the ground, connecting to the missing nin's own shadow. Oh! Nara! Gozu breathed out with regret, before his eyes slunk back into unconsciousness as Sasuke landed a heavy kick to the back of his head. Shikamaru's head was similarly snapped forward violently as he released his jutsu while glaring at the Uchiha. I told you already, don't attack the head when I bind their movements. It hurts my neck when you do something like that. Sasuke shrugged, my bad, but I definitely had him already. Thanks for nothing though. The Nara tsked and massaged the back of his neck, whatever. He looked over to the other side where Naruto had just finished up a combo with his clones, landing fists and kicks on his opponent. Their fight was a sight of orderly chaos. Naruto's shadow clones moved in conjunction with each other, though each strategically targeted different parts of his opponent's body to maximize what he called beat-down surface area. Mezu, like his brother, was not at all proficient in hand-to-hand combat beyond what was necessary. Facing off against a veritable endless tide of shadow clones Naruto produced with relative ease, he had no chance at all in a Taijutsu bout. Naruto easily finished him off, as his clones landed a devastating right hook to the liver, a sharp kick to the groin, elbow to the ribs, front kick to the torso, a barrage of punches to the back and 7 different fists and feet striking Mezu's face all at once. One would have pitied the man, if he hadn't been aiming to assassinate the bridge builder that was literally the last hope of the Land of Waves. The last remaining demon brother collapsed to the ground in a bruised and battered heap. Unconsciousness was a kinder alternative to what would have assuredly been mind-numbing pain throughout the entirety of his injured body. And honestly, this was Naruto holding back. After the initial 24 shadow clones he created, he only made 18 more to fill their ranks before Gozu was overwhelmed. Furthermore, they didn't use any bladed weapons, only sturdy fists and sharp kicks. Otherwise, the end result would more closely resemble a bloody pile of flesh than a human. Tazuna watched the battle in shock. The genin he had insulted and looked down on early on had easily defeated the assassins that came for his head. Truly, when facing shinobi, one could not underestimate even children. Tazuna jumped as he heard an applause from behind him. Kakashi slowly approached his genin, clapping, "Well done, kids. I was waiting for the moment I had to jump in to help, but I didn't have to. Good job. Although." He then turned towards Naruto. "Naruto, your shadow clone coordination is getting better and your taijutsu has improved as well. But you were a little slow on the draw, and not to mention you spoiled the surprise. Overall I give you a B+. The blonde responded with an embarrassed chuckle. "Sasuke, you handled your opponent well, but the fact that you let him approach the client we were hired to protect at all is a minus. And you were talking too much. What's the point of all that chatting when you could just take them down quick and easy?" The Uchiha, to his credit, just nodded quietly, taking down notes mentally. "Shikamaru, you didn't do much, but your last action saved our client. Though you could have intervened a lot earlier on and helped out your teammates, and I know you only hung back cause you were lazy. So you get a solid B." The Nara shrugged, "Good enough." Kakashi then looked at Tazuna, a stern gaze replacing his usual apathetic expression, "And finally we have you. Tazuna-san. I think we need to have a talk." Naruto's eyes sharpened and he flung a kunai at the bush, "Something's there." Shikamaru and Sasuke instinctively readied themselves as they formed a protective layer around Tazuna. After hearing the full story from the bridge builder about Gato and his methods of isolating and eventually dominating the Land of Waves, Team 7 had decided to continue with the mission, against Shikamaru's better judgment. The Nara had glumly protested his 2 hot-headed teammates' vote to continue with the mission, claiming that standard protocol dictated the team head back to the village given the lack of concrete information about the dangers they would face should they continue. To him, continuing on the mission would not only be reckless, but it would also be utterly foolish. As shinobi, the one thing their kind prioritized even over combat prowess was intelligence gathering. Given the right information and time to prepare, anything could be overcome. As such, going in half-cocked and blind would only add extreme danger for no good reason. Of course, Naruto would have none of that. The blonde accepted Shikamaru's reasoning but dismissed it as cold-hearted logic. Naruto had a completely different idea about what being a shinobi meant to him. He argued that a shinobi had the duty to help out those weaker than them, and Tazuna as well as the entire nation of Wave, while guilty of lying, deserved their help regardless of his deception. As much as Shikamaru wanted to comment on Naruto's warped and honestly inaccurate portrayal of what a shinobi was and actually did, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt from his own desire to abandon the people of Wave and retreat out of fear for his life. What Naruto dismissed as cold-hearted logic was in actuality the harsh reality of the world. Reality did not care about people's feelings. It is what it is. However, it could also be argued that it didn't have to be that way if the people living in this cold and indifferent universe occasionally gave a shit about someone other than themselves. Kakashi had little to add to their debate, content with waiting for a consensus to be reached among his team before making decision, and their other teammate, Sasuke, was in favor of pushing onwards. Though his reasons were drastically different from Naruto's. He didn't care about the pitiful people of Wave. All the Uchiha looked forward to was challenging himself and learn how far he had come. In all honesty, Sasuke had contempt rather than sympathy for the people of Wave. He did not believe that one man who wasn't even a shinobi could suppress an entire nation unless they let him do it. Such weakness and lack of resolve was pathetic to the Avenger. If he were in their place, and Gato truly had abused the population of Wave to such an extent, he would stop at nothing to achieve vengeance. The fact they had rolled over and let Gato conquer their nation with nothing but threats and intimidation was deplorable in Sasuke's eyes. With Shikamaru being outvoted by his overeager teammates, he had no choice but to relent under their combined enthusiasm. However, he had one condition before he fully agreed with their decision to continue on with the mission. Priority had to first be given to gathering intel. Specifically, from the two demon brothers, as Kakashi had identified. After breaking open a smelling salts to restore consciousness to the two Kiri missing nin, Kakashi began questioning them. Did they have comrades, and if so how many and what level were they, things like that. To their credit, Gozu and Mezu refused to buckle even under Kakashi's enhanced interrogation techniques, aka torture, albeit a tamer version than what the Jounin was capable of. He didn't want to traumatize his dear students on their first C-rank mission after all. Even after pulling out a few nails and breaking a few fingers, the demon brothers shared not a single iota of usable information. The two of them were clearly well versed in techniques to resist interrogations by giving either useless or false information. Naruto had turned green at the sight, not comfortable with the sudden viciousness of his sensei, while Shikamaru had a grim countenance. On the other hand, Sasuke was readily interested with the enhanced interrogation techniques his teacher was showing. He took down mental notes, in the event that he would need to utilize them in the future when searching for his brother. Though impressed with the demon brothers' tenacity, Kakashi then decided not to waste any more time and unveiled his Sharingan to put the two Kiri missing nin into a genjutsu meant to extract information. Sasuke, who had already been learning how to use his Sharingan under Kakashi's tutelage, was not surprised at the sight. According to what Kakashi had told him, such methods of extracting information using the Sharingan was not 100% reliable. First off, if the target had a strong will, a well-trained mind, or techniques to dispel genjutsu without the use of hand seals, it would be unlikely to work. Secondly, even if it did work, it was also difficult to know how accurate the information divulged by the target was in such a state. The genjutsu being used put them into a fugue state, making them forget that they were in an interrogation setting and the questions being asked to them were by someone they trusted. That did not guarantee a truthful answer, since there were many instances one would lie even to someone they trusted, like wanting to keep them safe and in the dark, for example. There were ways to circumvent the first challenge, one of which was to break down the will of the target through traditional torture. the pain slowly chipped away at their mental walls before they could no longer resist the genjutsu. But the second challenge was more difficult to overcome, requiring years of experience to determine the reliability of the information that was being revealed. Thankfully, the Sharingan genjutsu utilized on the demon brothers achieved spectacular results. It was quickly apparent during the questioning that the person they trusted the most was each other, so the illusion made them both think the questions were coming from their brother. Since they had no reason to hide information from one another, Kakashi was able to acquire everything he needed to learn quickly. Gozu and Mezu divulged that Gato had not only hired the two demon brothers, but he also had the infamous demon of the mist, Momokai's abuser, and his apprentice under the shipping magnate's employ. Kakashi had to seriously evaluate his team in order to ascertain whether or not Team 7 truly was capable enough to undertake such a mission. He was definitely capable of taking on Zabuza by himself, especially now that he knew who he was going up against and could subsequently think of countermeasures against the demon of the mist. It was the apprentice that concerned him. According to the demon brothers' confession, Zabuza's apprentice was someone with the Hyoton bloodline limit, and was an extremely talented shinobi that neared the peak of Chunin level strength despite his young age. Since Kakashi had to take on Zabuza, it was up to his team to fend off the Hyoton user. Strength-wise, the three of them combined would definitely not be a match against someone at that level. However, there were a few factors he had to consider as well. Firstly, Shikamaru's tactical genius was an advantage, especially now that the genin knew what his team was coming up against and could thus plan a strategy against the enemy. Secondly, Gozu and Mezu had both revealed that the Hyoton user did not fit the personality of a typical rogue ninja. Apparently, the boy was kind-hearted, and despite his talent for battle and incredible abilities, he disliked needing to kill people and avoided doing so whenever possible. Of course, Kakashi was sure that in a life-or-death scenario, the boy would definitely choose his own life and the life of Zabuza over some random Konoha genin, but it was an element Kakashi took into consideration as well. Kakashi then made the decision to continue onwards anyway, even after taking into account that his team would soon be facing a rogue Jounin and peak Chunin missing nin. Some might point out that he was being an irresponsible sensei, that he was putting his team into unnecessary danger when standard protocol demanded for their immediate withdrawal from the mission. However, to these naysayers, Kakashi would simply apathetically look at them with his one eye and tell them to mind their own business. He knew that his team was not a normal group of green genin. As one of 3 teams of genin selected to be groomed by the village into becoming elite shinobi, they had to undergo such challenges in order to temper their abilities. In his opinion, standard protocol only applied to the talentless who required rigid rules and structure to govern their behavior. Rather than domesticated animals raised in a controlled environment, he wanted his students to be beasts born and bred in the wilderness. It was only after overcoming countless challenges and surviving impossible situations that would alleviate their potential. Of course, Kakashi would never let his students be in any real danger. He had the abilities of a peak A-rank shinobi, one of Konoha's strongest military assets, and the confidence of one as well. Against a missing nin whose strength had stagnated upon his defection, and especially with the information gained from the interrogation, Kakashi was only somewhat worried for his students. If the Sundame was present during the decision-making process, he would definitely have pointed out that Kakashi was committing the grave mistake of thinking himself and his team as being special, and by extension making the mistake of being complacent and arrogant. However, Kakashi also knew himself and his team well enough to know the difference between arrogance and confidence. And so, his team continued on their travel towards the Land of Waves. a largely uneventful journey that had its monotony broken by Naruto suddenly launching a kunai in the bushes. As Kakashi approached where Naruto had thrown his projectile, he pushed away the bush to reveal a white rabbit frightened to death with a kunai embedded in the tree inches above its head. "Nice catch, Naruto," Sasuke complimented. The blonde chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. "I know, right? I'm amazing." Nodding, the Nara added, "Yeah, you are. No wonder you are the person most likely to be the next Hokage." Naruto beamed and embarrassedly replied, He, don't praise me too much, or I will get embarrassed." Kakashi ignored his team's conversation before raising his head in a particular direction as he sensed the slightest leakage of killing intent. His instincts, honed through countless battles and years of experience, flared as he heard the faint sound of metal whistling through the air. "Get down," he warned, and as expected, a giant blade spun towards them. All of the genin, including Tazuna who was pushed down by Sasuke, managed to throw themselves to the ground as the giant blade flew above them and embedded itself into a tree before a masked, shirtless figure landed on the blade. "Get down," he warned, and as expected, a giant blade spun towards them. All of the genin, including Tazuna who was pushed down by Sasuke, managed to throw themselves to the ground as the giant blade flew above them and embedded itself into a tree before a masked, shirtless figure landed on the blade. Zabuza took a moment to survey the target and his bodyguards. 3 genin, judging by their age and stupid faces, they must have just graduated from the academy. Threat level harmless. Their sensei on the other hand. The Jounin hummed jovially, well, if it isn't Momokai's Zabuza, missing nin from Kirigakure." The demon of the mist grinned under the bandages masking the lower half of his face upon seeing the Konoha Jounin reach up the headband covering his left eye. "Copy ninja, Sharingan no Kakashi. Did I get that right?" Kakashi stayed silent for a moment before giving instructions to this team. "Get in the manji formation. Quickly. Protect Tazuna and stay out of the fight." The 3 genin complied and retreated to form a triangle around the bridge builder, with their kunai held up in preparation. After that, Kakashi lifted up his headband to reveal the eye that gave him his nickname. Looks like I get to see the Sharingan in action. What an honor," Zabuza mockingly remarked. He continued, "You know, in the assassination unit of Kirigakure, we had a standing order to eliminate you on sight. You had quite a high bounty in our bingo book. The man who copied over 1,000 jutsu they called you. Copy ninja, Kakashi. Same to you. Demon of the Mist, Momokai Zabuza, one of the 7 swordsmen of the Mist. Or rather, ex-member of the 7 swordsmen. Did you know that Kirigakure is offering a bounty for your sword, Kubakiri Bocho, that is higher than the bounty for your head?" Kakashi remarked as he drew a kunai from his holster. Zabuza laughed, "I should be offended. A weapon is nothing but a tool for the user to wield. The only reason why Kubakiri Bocho is famous is because of me. But enough talk. Hand over the old man. Now. Or I will kill you and your students." "Sorry, but that's not happening," Kakashi shot back. "How would any other client trust Konoha if we simply gave them up when asked? And if you want to get to my students, you will have to go through me." The missing nin's eyes narrowed, "So you would rather die for your village then? Praiseworthy, but foolish. I'll just have to eliminate you first then. So be it. I have always wanted to test myself against an Uchiha, but I never got the chance before they got wiped out. I guess you'll do." Upon saying that, Zabuza retrieved his giant blade that had been embedded into a tree before jumping off and landing on the surface of a nearby lake. The missing nin formed a single hand seal, a testament to his proficiency and skill with the jutsu to require only a single hand deal. Suiten, Kirigakyo no Jutsu. A heavy mist soon enveloped the area, leaving visibility limited and obscured the team's sight of Zabuza. Kakashi, who already knew this was a likely strategy for his opponent, gestured to Naruto. Naruto, wind. The blonde looked caught off guard for a moment before remembering that this was the plan all along. Futon, great breakthrough. He put up a hand to his mouth after forming several hand seals and breathed out a large gust of wind. This was the jutsu Shinji had exchanged with Naruto in return for the Kichibunshin. It was one of the few wind release techniques that did not require a fine control. Though the Jinchuriki had been putting much effort into chakra control the past few months, even mastering tree walking in a matter of days due to his generous usage of shadow clones, it was still not at the level where he could boast about it. So the great breakthrough jutsu, which required only an abundance of chakra and nothing more, was perfect for a chakra powerhouse like Naruto. The great gust of wind expelled from Naruto's mouth blew away the mist, preventing Zabuza from hiding within it. But when the mist cleared, Zabuza was already missing from the surface of the lake where he had been standing on just moments before. The missing nin only needed that one moment out of sight from his opponents to vanish into thin air, hidden somewhere around the forested area. Kakashi immediately readied himself. At his level, relying on his sight alone was no longer sufficient, so instead of looking around to find his enemy, he merely stared ahead and waited for Zabuza to show any sign of his presence. The area was quiet, the three genin uncharacteristically remaining as silent as possible so as to not distract their teacher. Even Tazuna stayed quiet, only looking slightly fearful at the unseen enemy. Zabuza, who had immediately moved to hide himself in the foliage upon sensing the massive build-up of chakra prior to Naruto's usage of his futon ninjutsu, levied a silent curse in his head. Despite his boasts, he had initially planned on quickly dispatching the bridge builder under the guise of his mist before swiftly retreating. As a missing nin, he had learned to pick his battles. Their lives were constantly in a state of peril, so limiting unnecessary wastage of chakra was just common sense. Clashing against an elite jounin of Kakashi's caliber was simply pointless if he could complete his mission just by killing the bridge builder. However, with the mist now removed from the battlefield, he would have to assassinate his target out in the open. Chances of which was slim. The only advantage he had was the mind games he had played with Kakashi before the battle began. The Konoha jounin had three things to look out for: himself, his students and the bridge builder. Any of them could be Zabuza's target, so Kakashi had to split his attention three ways. That, and the fact that Haku was still in hiding and could make a move at any point. However, even though his initial strategy had been ruined, his objectives did not change. He had to kill the bridge builder, even if he had to go through Kakashi to do it. Zabuza concealed his presence even deeper, before moving towards the group of genin and the bridge builder slowly and stealthily. With such a large weapon, one would think he'd stick out like a sore thumb. However, his expertise in silent killing trumped the cumbersome size of the weapon. It didn't take long before he suddenly reappeared amidst the trio of genin and the civilian bridge builder, grinning at the incompetence of the genin and the famed Sharingan no Kakashi for their failure to notice him. Kakashi immediately turned around and his eyes widened at the sight of Zabuza, his stance ready to decapitate everyone around him. "It's over," Zabuza commented before swinging his sword in a circle around him, cutting through the three genin. The blade then headed towards the bridge builder. However, his eyes widened when instead of blood and gore, the 3 genin he had carved through all merely disappeared in a puff of smoke. Bunshin. That can't be. He realized before his thoughts were suddenly interrupted as his instincts fled. The bridge builder had somehow avoided the large blade, betraying his civilian origins, and lunged at the demon of the mist with a kunai aimed at the back of Zabuza's head. Despite the absurdity of the situation and the element of surprise, Zabuza still managed to avoid the knife that almost ended his life right there and then, but a devastating kick saturated with chakra still managed to land on the side of his torso, launching him away and breaking a couple ribs with a single blow. To avoid detection, Zabuza had avoided using chakra enhancement, relying solely on his body's base abilities to reach his target. So the kick that had been strengthened with chakra blew through his body's defenses, including the half-assed layer of protective chakra he had barely managed to put up upon sensing the attack. Despite his injuries, Zabuza still managed to catch himself in midair and landed on his feet, albeit roughly and a lot more worse for wear. The bridge builder smiled before the henge was released from his body, revealing another Kakashi who similarly had his headband lifted to show the crimson glare of his Sharingan. It's a sad day when the infamous demon of the mist fails to see through bunshin and henge used by a mere genin. How the mighty have fallen, Kakashi commented. After the first clash that saw Zabuza heavily injured by his kick, he knew the fight was already over barring any further surprises. He chuckled as he recalled how the plan had been formulated. When they were crossing the ocean to head towards the island of Wave, Shikamaru had proposed a strategy to the team. According to Gozu and Mezu, their troop of rogue shinobi planned for Zabuza to finish the job should they have failed. And the demon of the mist would attack somewhere on the road when the Konoha team were on their way back to Tazuna's town. So Shikamaru proposed for Naruto to create Kichibunshin and use henge to replace the 3 genin while Kakashi created his own shadow clone to replace Tazuna. He reasoned that Zabuza's main target would be the bridge builder, and since the rogue shinobi would be expecting a helpless civilian, Kakashi's shadow clone would be able to take him by surprise when he attacked. The result was a smashing success that saw Zabuza taking a serious injury while the rest of the team safely and sneakily trailed behind the shadow clones from a distance. The missing nin glared with a murderous fury but could only curse himself for his own idiocy. He could feel that 2 or 3 of his ribs had been broken from the impact. While the pain was a mere fraction of his actual tolerance for punishment, the injury would undoubtedly affect his battle prowess. Even if he generously assumed that Kakashi and himself were on the same level when he was in his healthy state, that had completely changed now. He had to admit that he had underestimated this group of Konoha shinobi. Kirinin always thought of themselves as superior to the shinobi from every other village. He himself held firm that Kiri's method of pitting academy graduates against each other in death matches was what defined their superiority. Konoha especially, was too kind and too benevolent towards their own shinobi. Sure, they were a proper shinobi force, sending shinobi on suicide missions were par for the course. But their shinobi never held the same emotionlessness, brutality and savagery true shinobi really needed to excel. Also Zabuza believed. Which was a large part of why he had underestimated them in the first place. Perhaps it was the years he had spent in hiding and running away from Hunter Nin, or maybe even his edge dulling from age. But Zabuza had to face the fact he was getting soft. His instincts no longer what they used to be when he was a proper member of Kiri's 7 Swordsmen of the Mist, fighting and killing any of Kiri's enemies. And now, he paid the price of his carelessness. The best case scenario here was managing a successful escape. Fighting and killing Kakashi was no longer even an option. Worst case. Zabuza cleared away his pessimistic thoughts. They were only a hindrance. Focus, he reminded himself. Emotionless. Cold and sharp like the metal of his sword. Unfeeling like a tool he was raised as. His grip tightened on his blade, though because of his injury, he could now feel the real weight of the weapon which he once wielded like a feather. The strain on his muscles pressing against his broken ribs sent surging waves of raw, unadulterated pain shooting up his torso. But he ignored it. There was only one goal here: run. His grip tightened on his blade, though because of his injury, he could now feel the real weight of the weapon which he once wielded like a feather. The strain on his muscles pressing against his broken ribs sent surging waves of raw, unadulterated pain shooting up his torso. But he ignored it. There was only one goal here: run. Zabuza jumped away, into the trees, and continued sprinting. Haku knew not to reveal himself. Not until he was in true mortal peril. And in the event that he did appear, and as much as he was reluctant to, Haku's sacrifice would buy him precious seconds to escape. Kakashi understood Zabuza's thoughts all too well. Battles between high-level shinobi were more akin to shogi matches than a contest of strength. The ability to think 10 moves ahead, predict what your opponent was thinking and discerning any potential traps was what set the truly elite apart from the mediocre. Before Zabuza even moved, Kakashi and his shadow clone had already been prepared to chase him down. Their Sharingan eyes allowed them to see the minute twitches of his muscles just as Zabuza made the decision to run. And without an injury weighing them down like Zabuza had, Kakashi and his shadow clone easily cut off his escape path, pincerring him between two identical-looking ninjas. Unlike Mezu, who mistakenly identified Naruto's Kichibunshin as Sachibunshin, Zabuza was rather knowledgeable about the various secret techniques belonging to different hidden villages. He had to be successful at his previous job at Kiri's assassination unit. As a result, he was aware that one of the Kakashis pincerring him was a clone, and thus the greatest chance he had to escape was by going through the clone instead of the original. However, one crucial feature about the shadow clone was that it was impossible to identify which was the clone and which was the original. Zabuza, who was not part of Team 7's planning process, had no way of knowing which was the clone. 50-50. One route led to certain death, and the other, an escape. Zabuza gave a feral grin, despite his bleak circumstances. A 50% chance of survival was way better odds than many impossible battles he had been through before. Circulating dense chakra into his muscles, Zabuza exploded towards one of the Kakashis, Kubakiri Bocho slicing through the air, similarly empowered with chakra. Of course, there was no way Kakashi would let himself get cut, clone or otherwise. Now that he had Zabuza hurt and cornered, he had to get rid of him here and now. His hands blurred, forming 12 hand seals under a second, Doton, Earth Fang field. Slamming his hand into the ground, a wave of earth chakra transferred from his palms into the ground and the earth immediately morphed according to Kakashi's wishes. Thick earthen spikes erupted from the ground, functioning both as a way of obstructing Zabuza's way forward as well as possibly injuring the rogue ninja with its sharp spikes. Needless to say, something as simple as a C-ranked jutsu could not possibly harm or surprise someone of Zabuza's caliber. As the spikes emerged from the ground, the demon of the mist immediately used one that had appeared in front of him as a vantage point to bounce back in the opposite direction, towards the other Kakashi who had moved to chase after the missing nin. The thick earthen spike shattered into pieces the moment Zabuza leapt off of it, an awesome display of strength, the sheer quantity of chakra the Kiri shinobi had pumped into his legs, before rocketing back. Zabuza never intended to try and run away so obviously. His initial charge was only a way to disguise his true intentions, which was to carve through the Kakashi behind him. His speed, bolstered by the momentum of jumping off the spike, drastically enhanced the kinetic force behind his blade swung in Kakashi's direction. Had Kakashi been any other shinobi below his level, or had he not possessed the predictive capabilities of his Sharingan, Zabuza's speed and abrupt change in direction might have surprised him. However, Kakashi was not just any other shinobi. He was the copy ninja, someone who could be counted amongst the top 5 strongest shinobi currently residing in Konoha. And that strength did not measure just pure fighting abilities. Though Zabuza flew through the air extremely quickly, with a Bito's Sharingan that blessed him with immense dynamic vision, he could see through the demon of the mist's movements. And the one fatal flaw of Zabuza's plan was that he could not maneuver himself in midair. Kakashi immediately moved out of the way of Kubakiri Bocho's trajectory, before the same kunai he had tried using to stab through Zabuza's head was thrusted once again towards the missing nin. However, as the demon of the mist struck the ground with Kubakiri Bocho, missing Kakashi's body entirely, the impact and contact with the ground allowed Zabuza to twist his body in midair with a surprising flexibility and acrobatic prowess one would not expect from a man with such a stocky build. This allowed Zabuza to once more evade the sharp blade of the kunai, and even allowing him to land on the opposite side of both the Kakashi who were now behind him. "See ya!" The missing nin mockingly jeered before sprinting away with all his might. The 2 Kakashi behind him watched his retreat indifferently. "Why did you think I only created 1 clone?" one of them commented as another Kakashi erupted from the ground in front of Zabuza and landed another devastating kick that crashed into the rogue shinobi's sternum, launching him back towards the other 2 Kakashis waiting patiently. This final clone was Kakashi's cherry on top of the plan Shikamaru had crafted. It was not a Kichibunshin, but an actual Sachibunshin this time. The earth-natured chakra that made up its body allowed the clone to effectively hide its presence beneath the earth to avoid detection until it was needed. Furthermore, due to the earth-nature chakra, its blows were a tier heavier than what Kakashi was capable of with his base body without chakra enhancement. The damage from the kick was not as heavy as one would expect, however, as Zabuza had saturated his body with chakra this time round, which provided an added layer of much-needed defense. However, the Earth clone's attack did prevent him from running away, as well as providing the opportunity for Kakashi to finish off the demon of the mist. Zabuza managed to stop the momentum from the kick by stabbing his blade into the ground, leaving a long gash across the earth. However, this did little to prevent him from being surrounded once more. He managed to swiftly pull out his blade to deflect a flurry of shuriken thrown at him, however he was forced to block a kick aimed at his head with his forearm. Then he had to slip another punch thrown by the Sachibunshin. Zabuza swung Kubakiri Bocho to counterattack, but his arm holding the blade was stopped before he was caught with another hook that landed smoothly on his jaw, leaving him dazed for a moment. The sight of 3 identical-looking Kakashis ganging up on Momokai Zabuza, the demon of the mist, was hard to look at for anyone who knew his history. The former member of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist struggled to hold his own, but not to mention counterattacking. Just trying to block and evade attacks from 3 different directions was already difficult. Zabuza finally managed to pull himself away from the flurry of blows, recklessly going on the offense by charging towards one of his opponents and ignoring the punch that landed on the same spot as his broken ribs, as well as a kunai that stabbed into his back. Fortunately for him, the charge was luckily aimed at a Kichibunshin, and the impact was enough to destroy the clone, disappearing in a cloud of white smoke. With 1 out of 3 opponents destroyed, Zabuza immediately turned back to frenziedly slash at his remaining enemies, swinging his giant blade with wild abandon. The demon of the mist was not exactly close to death, but his experience and instinct told him he was not far from a point of no return. So the tried and true method of getting himself out of it was to slaughter and go wild with bloodlust. The Sachi Bunshin lacked the mental faculties to avoid Zabuza's frenzied attacks and was easily carved into pieces. Now, the only one left was the original Kakashi, who jumped back to avoid the half-crazed demon. In truth, Kakashi was trying to hold himself back from launching powerful ninjutsu. The usage of the Shadow Clone had already halved his chakra capacity, while the Sharingan, though powerful, drained his remaining reserves like a voracious glutton. The C-ranked Doton ninjutsu as well as the Sachi Bunshin similarly consumed not insignificant amounts of chakra. Furthermore, with the knowledge that Zabuza had an additional partner hidden somewhere, Kakashi was trying to fight while conserving his remaining reserves as much as possible. As Zabuza slowly ceased his rampage, he could finally take stock of his injuries. Aside from the multiple bruises that would surely start forming in a few hours' time, blood was also leaking from his mouth from the internal injuries. Every breath he took was labored and sent sharp pain from the broken ribs that had further shattered from the last attack from Kakashi. Most importantly, the kunai stabbed deep into his body hit something vital. He could feel the internal bleeding from the ruptured organ. He would have to receive immediate medical attention otherwise. If he pushed himself, he could continue fighting at peak condition for a few minutes max, but the drawback afterwards would leave him at death's door. Which meant he had to kill Kakashi during that short time frame, otherwise he would most definitely die, or worse, be captured. But he also knew that Kakashi wasn't dumb. The Konoha would also realize that the few minutes would be his last-ditch effort, so he would only need to stay away for some time before Zabuza by himself. Running away was also not an option. He could similarly only run at max speed for a couple minutes, and judging by the fight so far, Kakashi was just as fast as if not faster than him. He could, at best, be chased for some time before collapsing and getting captured. Which meant that his only option now was. Zabuza's thoughts were interrupted when 2 senbon needles suddenly flew into his neck before he slumped forward and fell to the ground motionless. That's it, guys. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also make sure you tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.